According to ChatGPT, arrested development is a term used in psychology to describe a situation where a person's emotional, social, or psychological development appears to stop or become significantly delayed at an earlier stage than expected. As a result, an adult may consistently respond to stress, relationships, or responsibilities in ways that resemble a much younger person's coping style. It's not a formal diagnosis, but it's used in psychology, psychotherapy, and everyday discussion. What does it look like? It looks like having difficulty regulating emotions, avoiding responsibility or commitment, reacting to conflict with behaviors that are more typical of a younger age, like tantrums, withdrawal, or blaming others, struggling to form stable, healthy relationships, depending heavily on others for validation or decision making, and having trouble tolerating frustration or delayed gratification. What does arrested development have to do with the Lucy Letby case, you may ask? Well, today is part 4 of my series on the individuals and institutions involved in this terrible miscarriage of justice. And it is specifically about Ravi Jayaram. And I think that this pathology of arrested development has a lot to do with Ravi Jayaram's behavior. I think he exhibits a lot of the signs of arrested development, and I think his actions throughout also show and represent that pathology. And I'll say more about why later. But just to also note, I'm not a medical professional. I'm not an expert on psychology or psychiatry. I am just stating my opinion and my hypothesis based on what I've seen from Ravi Jayaram. It's my intuition and that's it. But I would just like to open the door to conversation about how this could have happened for everybody and shed more light on Lucy Letby's innocence, really, is the most important aspect here. So let's start with Ravi Jayaram's young adulthood, which we don't have too much information on. But what we do know is that his father was a consultant and his brother is a renowned ophthalmologist consultant in London. And Ravi Jayaram never wanted to be a doctor. He wanted to be a performer. But as he told Michelle Warden, that's not what a nice young boy from his background does. And so he decided to follow in his father and brother's footsteps and become a doctor. But he never let go of his dream. And he was a busker on the streets of Chester, meaning he would sing and dance for money on the sidewalks of Chester when he was in his teens. In college, he did the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. And he, even after he became a doctor, was a mainstay in British television, in game shows, and on Born Naughty, which was a show where he was a doctor who spoke with children who had behavioral issues and tried to diagnose what was going on and tried to help. So all of this is to say that he is a divided man. He was a doctor on a struggling unit, and yet he was traveling to do publicity for all of these different projects he was working on. While babies were dying, he was going off and doing Born Naughty. And then he came back and blamed somebody else for the disaster that ensued because there wasn't a consultant presence on the ward when there needed to be. I'm just going to say this, and I'm not sure if what I show you really proves it, but I do think that Ravi Jayram has been a man on the edge for a really long time. If you look at the very little footage we have from the Thirlwall inquiry and you see his face and the way he speaks, and if you just watch him speak in any video that you can find of him, there's something on edge about him. Maybe it's tiredness, but I think it's more. And I'm just going to show you this audio from his appearance on The Weakest Link. And I just want you to listen to his voice. Now, I'm sure he's nervous, so it might not be fair to use this as an example, but for some reason, it just gives me the chills listening to him. He just seems like somebody who is seeking something that he never is able to find. So just listen.
Anything else?
I indulge in the occasional karaoke.
Put your board down. What can you sing?
I could do Honky Tonk Woman by the Rolling Stones in tribute to
Well,
you.
I doubt whether you can, but you can try. Have you started yet?
I met a gin-soaked ballroom queen in Memphis. She tried to take me upstairs for a ride.
So I don't know, if you just listen to the sound of desperation in his voice, I just feel that's telling of something more. He has an MBBS, Bachelor of Medicine and Bachelor of Surgery at the University of Newcastle, which he received in 1990. And there's very little else that you can find about his education, except that he had undergrad work at the University of Bristol, which is a connection with Breary. Breary graduated from the University of Bristol as well. I believe Breary is much older than him, or not much, but is older, slightly older than him. So I wonder if that connection plays a role in their partnership and in their codependency, which I think is pretty obvious from their behavior, but I shouldn't diagnose probably. Breary was stronger minded than Ravi Jayaram. He was a bully. He was the head of the neonatal unit. And he decided to point the finger at Lucy Letby very early for the deaths and collapses that were occurring at an unprecedented rate on the ward. And once he decided that this was what had been happening, once he decided that a scapegoat was in order, even though I don't think it was conscious, he then turned his attention to Ravi Jayaram. We have emails and we have notes of people who are present who say that the two were talking about Lucy Letby on the ward from the very beginning and creating a story and a narrative around her guilt. And I believe that because Breary was stronger minded than Jairam, he was able to brainwash him into joining in on the cause. And Jairam joined quickly. Arian Powell even said that there was brainwashing going on the unit once the other consultants joined in. And I think Jairam was the first one to succumb to the brainwashing. This isn't to take away the accountability of Jairam, but it's just to say that he's weak-minded, I think, and he's childlike. I think he's arrested in his development, and it was easy to turn him. He jumped on board. I think Jairam has a desire to be loved. He has a need for accolades. He has a need for attention, as is apparent from his constant seeking of television appearances and singing with his band, the Delusions or whatever they're called, the Delusional, I think it's called, singing with his band, always putting himself in the center of the spotlight, center of attention, so that he can receive that love and adoration that he craves. And so when Breary comes to him and says, "There's a killer on the unit," and Jairam already has the stress of the unit falling apart and the knowledge that he is not there when he's supposed to be. He's focusing more on his acting career than he is on his vocation, on his responsibility of caring for infants who are very sick in a neonatal ward. When he realizes that the unit is falling apart, he can't account for his presence. It's pretty easy for him to also decide that there is another reason for the deaths outside of his own failings. And so he does. He's feeling the stress and he points the finger immediately with Breary. So all of those things, the need to be loved and accepted by Breary, the need for attention outside of bad attention, which is what he's starting to receive, and the need for accolades, which he's certainly not receiving at the Countess of Chester in 2015 and 2016. If you look at the newspaper articles that came out about the fact that it was the fifth worst hospital in the NHS for detecting sepsis, all of these things made him very quick to blame Lucy Letby. His meeting with Sue Hodgkinson about Lucy Letby after it had been decided that Lucy was innocent and after it became clear that the hospital was not going to just jump on board with these consultants about a nurse being responsible for the deaths on the unit. He says and does many things that to me are a sign of arrested development. He complains that he's unwanted. He says that literally. We feel unwanted. He asks, why are Breary and I the only ones being singled out here? He complains about Tony Chambers wagging his finger at him to not step out of line. He complains about being told not to say anything about the situation during the celebration of achievement awards where he was giving a speech. he says, that's not my style. But the question is, why did people feel the need to tell him in the first place not to say anything about it at these awards? Because they believed he would, because he acts like a child. He throws even more of a tantrum and accuses the hospital of not caring about patient safety in the case. You don't care about patient safety. You only care about being sued, which may or may not be true, but hopefully it's not, but maybe that's true. But it's just not how you behave in a professional setting, but he couldn't control himself. That's arrested development. The inability to regulate one's emotion, arrested development. He's a childish man who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. And when he realized that the management of the hospital was not going along, it just made him dig his heels in further. And he stayed on the same story. He could not take not getting what he wanted. And he threw a tantrum. He threatened quitting. He said he was going to quit, which would leave them in a terrible position because they were already understaffed and it would be hard to find somebody to replace him. So he threatened that, which of course probably wasn't the case. It's, first of all, never a good idea to move from hospital to hospital as a doctor. It doesn't look good. He had roots in the area. He probably had a house in the area. He was settled in the area. He had a high position in the hospital, even though it wasn't going well. It was a high position. He wasn't going to quit. It was a threat. It was an empty threat. I can't say that for sure, but I think it was probably an empty threat, hoping to get what he wanted, which, by the way, he did. He went to the police and he pushed and pushed and pushed, and the dumb policemen and women were starstruck by the TV doctor, and they believed him right away, and he got what he wanted. An unreliable witness is a person whose account of an event cannot be fully trusted as an accurate representation of what actually happened. This does not necessarily mean they are lying. A witness can be unreliable for many reasons, including honest mistakes, limitations of memory, bias, or intentional deception. Some common reasons a witness may be considered unreliable include faulty memory, poor observation conditions, bias, or personal interest. A witness may unconsciously interpret events in a way that favors their own beliefs, relationships, or desired outcome. Suggestibility, leading questions, conversations with others, media coverage, or repeated interviews can alter a person's recollection over time. Inconsistencies, significant changes between different tellings of the same event can raise questions about reliability, though minor inconsistencies are common and do not necessarily indicate dishonesty. And then intentional deception. These are all definitions and common reasons given by ChatGPT. Ravi Jayaram is an unreliable witness. He has said different things during the actual event in notes he took, in meetings with hospital management. He has accounted for things differently with the cops, with the prosecution in the court case, and at the Thurwall inquiry. All different stories, all the time. This makes him an unreliable witness. And in fact, he has been called out for lying on the stand for perjury. So he is the definition of an unreliable witness and is a huge reason why Lucy's court case was a complete clown show and needs to be returned to the Court of Appeals, and she needs to be exonerated. She shouldn't have to go through a retrial. She should just be exonerated, but we'll see what happens with that. What are some ways that Ravi Jayaram is an unreliable witness? Well, there are many. I'm going to focus on a few. I'm sure many of you will note in the comments the other ways in which he is an unreliable witness. But first and foremost, Jayaram looked up the Lee and Tanswell paper, which was on air embolism that Dowie Evans used later in the court case to accuse Lucy Letby of murdering infants with air embolism. And at first he said that he looked up the paper in 2015 And then later he said he looked it up in 2016. And his reasons for giving different years was because it made sense for the story he was telling at the time. It's not clear when he looked up the Lee and Tanswell paper. Did he look it up when Stephen Brewery first brought him in on this lie that they concocted? Or did he look it up later when Child K happened? It's never been clear, but he's never told the truth about it either. Child K, that is the biggest example of the ways in which Jayaram is an unreliable witness, and also the ways in which he has done irrevocable harm to Lucy Letby. There are many aspects of the collapse of Child K that he misremembered or told fallacies about, and these are just some. First, he told the court during Lucy's trial that he walked in on her standing over the cot of Child K, and that Child K's breathing tube had become dislodged and she wasn't doing anything about it. And he said on TV later that it was a night that will be burned into his memory for the rest of his life, or something like that. But in fact, later an email emerged that showed on the night that he took notes that Lucy Letby had called for help, that she did indeed call for help, and he answered her. So which is it? In court, he said he had a gut feeling, a bad feeling, and he went in to see what she was doing in there and saw her standing over a dying infant. And then in reality, in the notes he took that night, he said the nurse called for help and he answered. Which is it? I think it's the notes. And why did he lie? Because he's a child who wanted to get what he wanted, and that's it. He didn't even know for sure whether it was Lucy at all. There's another nurse who worked with Lucy who looked a lot like her, same coloring, same facial features. And it was dark in the ward because it was the middle of the night. It was at like 3 o'clock in the morning. And so he wasn't even sure if it was her. And in fact, there was a lot of back and forth about who was in that room at the time. And it appears it was not Lucy, but he wanted it to be Lucy because he already had this story in his mind. So when he got his feeling, he said, he looked and there was a woman standing over the cot, and it must have been Lucy because in his arrested mind, that's what he needed it to be. But in fact, it most likely was not Lucy at all. And also, the person who was standing over the cot called him for help. So there was no gut feeling involved. There was just an irrational, unreasonable man who was on the edge, who wanted to find Lucy Letby guilty of something she did not do. The main question here is, why didn't he raise the alarm that night? If he believed that Lucy Letby was murdering an infant, a premature, vulnerable, ill infant, why didn't he go to the police immediately? What would you do? If you walked into a room and there was someone standing over the bed of an infant this big, killing them, watching them die, would you just sit back and say, okay, well, let's just see what happens next? let's just let's just wait this one out. See what happens to the next baby. Oh, that one died too. Okay, let's keep waiting. Let's just keep seeing what happens because I don't want to be a whistleblower, or I'm not sure if it's true. And yet he was sure it was true, he said, because he walked in on her standing over the cot of a dying baby and doing nothing. So why didn't he do something? Why didn't he raise the alarm? It was his legal obligation to raise the alarm if somebody was hurting a child, and yet he didn't. If he was so upset, if it was so burned into his memory that she had murdered a baby, why didn't he go to the cops? No one knows. Oh, wait, yes, we do, because it didn't happen. And his mind, which is a confused one that is on edge and is childish and is incredibly limited and easily swayed by stronger people, aka Brewery, he didn't have control over his behavior. He's a sick man, just like Brewery. He didn't have control over himself. If he could have controlled himself, if he could have taken responsibility for his mistakes, he would have. This is just fact. He couldn't. His fear overrode rationality. And his pathology helped guide his behavior. He got in too deep, I think, too. He was too limited to reverse course, and so he dug his heels in. It was the best he could do. Hospital management didn't fire her. Cops at first didn't think anything had gone wrong. And so, with a push from Breary, who was probably on him all the time to do something, he he pushed back. He jumped on board. He wanted his buddy Breary to love him and accept him and not get any of the bullying treatment that he probably got when things didn't work out well with hospital management or the cops. And he created and concocted stories to try and fit the narrative. And sadly, he's still lying. He's not responding to David Davis, who said that he should be held accountable for perjury. Will he be held accountable? I don't know. Will Breary be held accountable? I don't know. I have a harder time finding compassion for Ravi Jayaram because he was so much more active in the attack. I know that Breary was the driving force behind it, but Jairam was equally as guilty because he created all of the fallacies around it. He created stories that could be used in court to convict her. And yet, I'm trying to find compassion for this limited person who was not developed emotionally enough to be able to handle the level of responsibility that he had, who should have just been probably doing game shows and reality shows for the rest of his life rather than being a doctor, who should not have felt the need to please his family, but rather just please himself. These are all things that led to limitations that created the nightmare that was visited upon Lucy Letby. This is nobody's fault but Jairam's. But I think just like Breary, if he could have done better, he would have. He couldn't. And I have compassion for the guilt and pain that exists in his unconscious, in his subconscious because of what he's done. It's there. When we lie, when we create havoc in the lives of those around us, we might consciously believe ourselves to be right, but the truth still exists in the back of our minds. It just does. We can't lie to ourselves. We can't. So it's there, and that man has to live with that. And if you look at him now, he has aged. He is still a man on edge. He suffers. So I have compassion for him too, as hard as it is. Thank you for listening. And also, I wanted to thank you all for your amazing support. I wanted to also acknowledge that there are some people who comment in my videos about how I am making money off of this or having some kind of personal gain, making fun of what I usually post on YouTube. And I just want to make it clear, I'm not making any money from these videos, nor will I. I'm not gaining out anything personally from these videos, except the right to talk about it and to share my views on it because it's the only thing I feel I can do. The only reason I'm doing this is number one, to shed more light on Lucy Letby's plight internationally. And also because I know that before I was doing this, all I had were the videos other people were making, and they helped me. I felt like something was at least being done for her. And so I would watch them and consume them all the time because there's nothing else to do in this situation right now except for sign petitions, write letters, and create videos and send belief and hope toward her. So I'm making these videos now because I spent so much time watching others' videos that I decided I would create one or two, and people seem to be watching them because I think it gives another outlet for people who feel helpless in this situation. And therefore, I decided to keep doing it, and I will keep doing it for as long as I can. And again, I won't gain anything from it except for the feeling of hope that she will be exonerated soon, and the hope that shining more light on it will make that happen faster.